In the summer of 1863, wine growers in the south of France noticed something strange. In the middle of the growing season, healthy vines began to become yellow. Then they withered, then they died. Nobody could find a cause. No disease on the leaves, no rot on the grapes. The killer was invisible, and it was moving, village by village, valley by valley. The death spread across France like a plague, and France, more than any nation on earth, was built on wine. Wine paid its farmers, filled its treasury, and defined its identity. Over the next 3 decades, this invisible killer would destroy most of every vineyard in the country, wipe out family fortunes centuries old, and bring one of the world's great powers to its knees. And the strangest part? Both the killer and the cure came from America. But to understand why the death of a plant could bring a nation to its knees, you have to go back 8,000 years, to a mountain valley where humans first turned spoiled grapes into a drink they would worship, tax, fight over, and build empires on. Here is what makes wine different from every other food and drink in history. Bread had to be invented, cheese had to be discovered, beer had to be engineered. Wine invents itself. Wild grape skins are naturally coated in a dusty white bloom of living yeast. Crush the grapes, walk away, and within days the yeast eats the sugar and turns the juice into alcohol. No recipe, no knowledge, no human required. Which means the first wine in history was not made by a person. It was found, a forgotten container of grapes, already transformed, waiting for someone brave or hungry enough to drink it. Someone did, and we know where. In 2017, scientists analyzing broken pottery from 2 ancient villages in the country of Georgia, in the Caucasus Mountains, found the unmistakable chemical fingerprint of wine soaked into the clay. Those jars are 8,000 years old, the earliest hard evidence of winemaking on Earth. The people who made them were farming with stone tools. They had no writing, no wheels, no metal. But they had wine, and they were making it deliberately in large clay vessels as a regular part of life. Georgians never stopped. They still ferment wine in buried clay vessels called verve, using a method that has run unbroken for 8 millennia. It may be the oldest living tradition in human food. Then, in a cave in Armenia, archaeologists found something even more remarkable, a complete winery, over 6,000 years old. A grape crushing basin, fermentation vats, storage jars, a drainage system. It is the oldest known winery in the world, and it was built next to a burial site. From the very beginning, wine was never just a drink. It was ritual. It stood at the border between the living and the dead. There is an old Persian legend about how humans first dared to drink it. A princess, cast aside by her king, decided to end her life. She drank from a jar of grapes that had spoiled and foamed, a jar marked as poison. Instead of dying, she felt her sorrow lift for the first time in months. She brought the discovery to the king, and wine won her back her place at court. Is the story true? Certainly not. It comes from legend, written down thousands of years after the fact, but it captures something real. Every ancient culture that met wine described it the same way, not as food, but as a force. Something changed how you felt, how you spoke, how you saw the world. In an age before medicine and before science, which was not chemistry, that was the touch of the gods. And wine had one more trick. In the ancient world, water could kill you. Rivers and wells carried diseases nobody understood. But wine, with its alcohol and acidity, was hostile to many of the microbes that made water dangerous. Mixing wine into questionable water was ancient insurance. The drink of the gods was also, quietly, a survival tool. This combination, sacred and practical at the same time, seemed like a small thing. It was not. It was the formula that would carry wine into every empire that followed. By the time of the Pharaohs, wine had become the ultimate status symbol. In Egypt, beer was for the workers, wine was for royalty, priests, and the gods. When archaeologists opened the tomb of Tutankhamun, they found dozens of wine jars sealed inside. And here is the astonishing part. The jars were labeled. The year of harvest, the vineyard, the name of the winemaker. 3,300 years before the modern wine industry, the Egyptians had already invented the wine label. Some jars were even marked by quality, the ancient equivalent of a premium vintage. The boy king was buried with a cellar, but wine was still trapped in the palaces of the few. The people who set it loose on the world were the Phoenicians, the greatest sailors and traders of the ancient Mediterranean. From the coast of modern Lebanon, their ships carried wine and living grapevines to North Africa, to Spain, to the islands of the sea. Everywhere they traded, they planted. The Phoenicians treated wine the way later empires would treat oil, a portable, storable form of wealth that every culture wanted. They even worked out how to protect it on long voyages, sealing their clay amphoras with resin and olive oil to keep the wine from spoiling. Wine had become the world's first great luxury export. Then came the Greeks, who did something stranger. They turned wine into philosophy. The Greek symposium, drinking together, was a formal gathering where citizens debated politics, poetry, and the nature of the universe over carefully watered wine. And that watering mattered. To the Greeks, drinking wine mixed with water was the mark of a civilized man. Drinking it straight was the mark of a barbarian. Wine had a god of its own, Dionysus, with festivals, cults, and temples across the Greek world. The father of medicine, Hippocrates, prescribed wine for fevers, for wounds, and for digestion. And when Greek settlers reached southern Italy and found it bursting with wild vines, they gave the land a name, Oenotria, the land of wine. They had no idea how right that name would turn out to be, but it was Rome that turned wine from a luxury into an engine of empire. In Rome, wine stopped being a drink for kings and became a drink for everyone: senators, shopkeepers, slaves, and soldiers. Every Roman legionary received wine as part of his standard ration, usually in the form of pasca, cheap sour wine cut with water. It killed some of the dangers lurking in local water supplies. It delivered calories, and it kept morale from collapsing on brutal campaigns. Roman commanders understood a simple equation that generals would rediscover for the next 2,000 years. An army without its drink ration is an army on the edge of mutiny. Wine was not comfortable. It was military equipment, and Rome drank like no civilization before it. In the buried city of Pompeii, archaeologists have uncovered street after street of wine bars. Quick service counters where ordinary Romans stopped for a cup the way people today stop for coffee. The walls still carry graffiti complaining about watered-down wine and praising the good stuff. One vintage became so legendary. The harvest of 121 BC, the so-called opinion vintage, that Romans were still drinking bottles of it more than a century later, the way collectors today hoard rare whiskey. Here is the part most people never realize. As the legions conquered Europe, they planted it. Vineyards followed the army into Gaul, up the Rhone, into Bordeaux, Burgundy, and along the Rhine into Germany. The most famous wine regions on earth, the names that today sell bottles for thousands of dollars, began as Roman supply lines. The empire even fought the world's first wine trade war. In the year 92, the Emperor Domitian ordered vineyards in the provinces torn up, at least in part to protect Italian producers from the competition. Wine had become so valuable that an emperor was willing to destroy it to control it. Then Rome collapsed. The trade routes died, the cities emptied, and the great vineyard estates fell into ruin. Wine should have retreated into legend. It did not, because wine had made one alliance that would outlast the empire itself, an alliance with God. Christianity had placed wine at the very center of its most sacred ritual. Every mass required it, which meant that wherever the church went, and in the centuries after Rome, the church went everywhere, the wine had to go too. Monasteries became the arks that carried winemaking through the Dark Ages. And just as monks perfected cheese in their cellars, monks in Burgundy spent literal centuries perfecting wine. Benedictine and Cistercian orders kept meticulous records, harvest after harvest, for hundreds of years. They noticed that grapes from one slope made consistently better wine than grapes from the next slope over. Same weather, same grape, different soil. So, they walled off the best plots stone by stone. Legend claims some monks went as far as tasting the soil itself to judge it. Out of that obsession came an idea that still rules the wine world today. That wine is not just a grape, but a place. The French call it terroir, and 800-year-old monastery walls still surround some of the most expensive vineyard land on the planet. And then there is the most misunderstood monk in history, Dom Perignon. Ask anyone, and they will tell you he invented champagne, that he called out to his brothers that he was tasting the stars. Here is the uncomfortable truth. That quote appeared in an advertisement centuries after his death, and Dom Perignon spent much of his career trying to get rid of the bubbles. In the cold cellars of the Champagne region, fermentation would stall in winter and restart in spring, building gas inside the bottles until they explode. Whole cellars could go off like chains of grenades. The bubbles were a defect, but across the channel, English drinkers tasted the fizzy failure and loved it, and English glassmakers happened to produce bottles strong enough to survive it. The mistake became the product. Within a century, the courts of Europe were toasting with champagne, and a flaw that once destroyed cellars had become the single most glamorous drink on earth, the wine of kings, coronations, and victory. If you find this video interesting, hit subscribe. We uncover the hidden history of everyday foods and drink every single week, and you will not want to miss what comes next. Because that invisible killer from the beginning of this video is about to arrive in France, and wine is about to face the closest thing to extinction in its 8,000-year history. And this is where the story takes its darkest turn. The killer stalking French vineyards in the 1860s was finally identified, and it was laughably small. Phylloxera, a sap-sucking insect, related to the aphid, barely a millimeter long. It had crossed the Atlantic on American vine samples imported by European collectors, surviving the journey thanks to an invention, the steamship, fast enough to deliver its tiny passengers alive. American vines had evolved alongside phylloxera for millions of years and shrugged it off. European vines had never met it. It attacked their roots, underground, out of sight, which is why nobody could find the killer. By the time a vine showed symptoms above ground, its roots were already being eaten alive. What followed was one of the greatest agricultural catastrophes in recorded history. The blight rolled across France for 3 decades, destroying vineyard after vineyard, millions of acres, most of every vine in the country. Wine was one of the pillars of the French economy, and the pillar was crumbling. Fortunes that had survived revolutions and wars evaporated. Desperation set in, and desperation got strange. The government offered a massive cash prize for a cure. Growers flooded their vineyards for weeks at a time to drown the insect. They injected the soil with harsh chemicals that sometimes killed the vines faster than the pest did. And in one widely reported folk remedy, farmers buried a live toad beneath each vine to draw out the poison. Nothing worked. Meanwhile, with real wine collapsing, fraud exploded. Fake wines brewed from raisins and coloring flooded the market because there was money to be made from a thirsty nation. When it finally came, it was too ironic to believe. If American roots could survive phylloxera, then European vines would have to live on American roots. Scientists proposed grafting, surgically joining French vines onto American rootstock. To many French growers, this was blasphemy. They swore French wine from American roots would taste of betrayal. They split into warring camps, the chemists versus the American cits, and fought it out in newspapers and parliament while the vineyards kept dying. But the grafted vines lived. The wine tasted like it always had. And so, quietly, the entire wine world surrendered. Today, most wine vines in Europe, including every legendary vineyard in France, grow on American roots. Read that again. Every bottle of great French wine for the past century has been, from the ground down, part American. The country that sent the plague also sent the cure. And the wine that runs through 8,000 years of human history survived by becoming a hybrid of 2 worlds. Wine's next great test came from America again. In 1920, the United States banned alcohol entirely. Prohibition shut down hundreds of wineries overnight, and an industry that had taken generations to build collapsed in months. But wine, as always, found cracks in the law. Sacramental wine for churches remained legal, and church wine orders mysteriously soared. Better still, the law allowed households to make fruit juice at home, and Americans discovered a remarkable product, the grape brick, a solid block of concentrated grapes sold openly, with a warning label that customers read very, very carefully, instructing them exactly what not to do, step by step, unless they wanted the juice to turn into wine. Wink. California grape growers had one of the best decades in their history during the years when wine was illegal. When Prohibition ended in 1933, the American wine industry crawled out of the wreckage and began to rebuild. For the next 40 years, the wine world had a simple hierarchy. France at the top, and everyone else below. Then came May 24th, 1976, the day that hierarchy died in a single afternoon. A British wine merchant organized a blind tasting in Paris. 9 of the most respected judges in France, top critics, restaurateurs, sommeliers, would taste top French wines against unknown upstarts from California, with every bottle hidden. It was supposed to be a friendly demonstration of French superiority. Only one journalist even bothered to show up. Then the scores were counted. Both the red and white categories, the highest-rated wine was Californian. The judges were stunned. Some demanded their scorecards back. The story ran around the world, and the spell was broken forever. If California could beat France blind, anyone could. Australia, Chile, Argentina, South Africa, New Zealand. The New World wine boom that filled today's supermarket shelves traces straight back to that one afternoon in Paris. Today, wine is a global colossus. The world produces enough every year to fill tens of billions of bottles. Italy, France, and Spain still lead production, but the United States has become the largest wine-consuming nation on Earth. The drink of Pharaohs is now, by volume, a drink of Tuesday nights. But this next part tends to catch people off guard. In a museum in Speyer, Germany, sits a sealed glass bottle of wine recovered from a Roman tomb, 1,700 years old and still liquid. It is believed to be the oldest unopened bottle of wine on Earth, and scientists have debated for decades whether to open it. So far, nobody has dared. Meanwhile, at the opposite end of the market, a single bottle of French Burgundy from 1945 sold at auction in 2018 for over $500,000. One bottle, the price of a house, for less than a liquid produced the year the Second World War ended. Prices like that created a brand new crime, fine wine forgery. In the 2000s, a charming young collector took the American auction world by storm, selling rare vintage bottles by the millions of dollars and hosting legendary tastings for billionaires. The problem? Investigators eventually discovered he was manufacturing many of those legendary bottles in his kitchen, blending cheap wines to imitate famous vintages, printing fake labels, and reusing genuine empty bottles fished from restaurant trash. He fooled some of the wealthiest and most experienced collectors on Earth for years before the FBI raided his home and found a full counterfeiting workshop. He went to federal prison, and to this day, nobody knows how many of his fakes still sit in prestigious cellars, worth fortunes on paper and worth nothing at all in the glass. 25 centuries after Pompeii's bar owners were accused of watering down the wine, the oldest fraud in the business is still running. Only the prices have changed. Wine has even left the planet. A few years ago, a case of one of Bordeaux's most famous wines spent more than a year aboard the International Space Station. An experiment in how weightlessness and radiation affect aging. When the bottles returned, experts tasted them against identical bottles that had stayed on Earth and found the space-aged wine noticeably different. One of those bottles was later valued at around $1 million, making it the most expensive wine in existence, seasoned not in a cellar, but in orbit. And one bottle of wine went even further. In July 1969, minutes after the lunar module Eagle touched down on the moon, astronaut Buzz Aldrin, an elder in his church back in Texas, quietly unpacked a small vial of communion wine and a piece of bread and took communion on the lunar surface while the world waited for the moonwalk. NASA kept it quiet at the time, which means the first liquid ever poured and consumed by a human being in another world was not water, not coffee, not anything engineered by the space program. It was wine. 8,000 years after a farmer in the Caucasus Mountains sealed grapes in a clay jar, the same drink was raised in silence on the surface of the moon. Step back and look at what this drink has done. It invented itself in the wild, and humans have spent 8,000 years trying to keep up. It was sealed into the tombs of pharaohs with its own labels. It sailed with the Phoenicians as the world's first luxury export. It marched with the legions and planted the vineyards of France as Roman supply lines. It survived the fall of Rome inside monastery walls, turned its greatest defect into champagne, and stared down to extinction when an insect smaller than a grain of rice ate the roots out from under an entire nation. It was worship. It was medicine. It was money. It was the fuel of empires and the quiet companion of philosophers. It broke France's crown in a blind tasting, aged in orbit, and became the first drink ever consumed on the moon. And tonight, somewhere near you, in your own kitchen, someone will pull a cork without thinking twice about it. Inside that bottle is the oldest continuous project in human civilization. 8,000 years in a single glass. Not bad for a jar of spoiled grapes that nobody meant to make. If this story surprised you, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling us which part shocked you the most. The insect that nearly ended wine forever, the grape bricks that outsmarted Prohibition, or the communion on the moon. And like this video so more people can find it. We have a lot more hidden food history coming.